the leaves. In the off-chain environment, you basically just pass on BTXOs with a signature of the server. Yeah? The downside of this is that we're getting quite long off-chain transaction chains. So, yeah. And we have a bit of a trust trade-off, because if Felix here owns that BTXO in the off-chain environment, it belonged to Eric and Alice before. But these transactions, this is pre-signed Bitcoin transactions, they still exist. So if Felix owns the funds, but Eric and the server want to rug Felix, they could do so, because they could still, this is a 2 of 2 multi-sig, they could just spend this one. Yeah? So in the off-chain environment, if a user holds funds, basically every prior owner of that BTXO could collude with the operator and rug those funds. For me, the upside though, that's quite a heavy trust assumption actually. So you definitely need to upgrade server, like operator security. Arg Labs is doing that by potentially putting the signer into a TEE, a trusted execution environment. And another potential upgrade is to federate the signer itself by a nested MUSIC. But the good case is that the operator can only kind of like rug one BTXO at a time. It's not like Wallet of Satoshi that can just rug all the funds that are in there, but an operator would need to collude with, a user here to rug a BTXO here, and with a user in that chain. But to be fair, an operator could also insert itself into several off-chain transaction chains and could then rug many transactions in one go. Yeah. We call that state pre-confirmed. Operator could double spend if it colluded with the previous owner. And the good thing is though, if Felix is like, ooh, I'm not trusting this thing too much anymore, it can at any time participate in this on-chain settlement process and upgrade their fund security. So the on-chain settlement is not just there to renew funds, but also to reset these long transaction chains where potentially old owners can collude with an operator. And then users have full Bitcoin finality. Thing is that the fees for the on-chain settlement are higher than in the off-chain environment because we need the operator to provide liquidity for all funds that are being refreshed. And that, you always need to, if some party provides liquidity, you need to pay a market rate, because otherwise this entity could lend its money at for a certain rate on the market. So users, this is the nice thing, can dynamically switch between these trust assumptions. Yeah, I think I mentioned that already, like the operator needs to provide liquidity for the whole batch, and it can only be recovered after batch expiration. So the more often people participate in like on-chain settlement, the more liquidity is required to be provided by the operator, and that can get quite heavy, and can also kind of be an attack on the operator. So there need to be some, a user could just renew funds on an ongoing basis, and the user pays like an okayish fee, maybe 0.4% or so, but the operator needs to to provide a lot of liquidity for that process. And yeah, so the operator can kind of like be dried out. Yeah, and that also means the higher the monetary velocity, the higher is the liquidity requirement in the protocol. But yeah, the default arcade payments are executed off-chain. We don't need liquidity for those. And yeah, and one last thing, what needs to be taken into account when thinking about ARC is that yes, we have the unilateral exit, but it can get quite costly. So, because if a user, let's say the operator becomes unresponsive, and here Mr. X is like, I want to unilaterally exit. So user X has their pre-signed BTXO here. And it needs to put that on chain. But it cannot just put this single transaction on chain, but it has to put the whole transaction chain from the root. I mean, this is on chain anyway, this is the commitment transaction. But as said earlier, all this is not supposed to hit on chain, just in the case of unroll. If Mr. X unrolls, it needs to put all these transactions on chain. So on one hand, this transaction tree only contains 4 BTXOs. In the future, we're aiming at, I don't know, 1,000 BTXOs. Depending on the amount of leaves, the depth of the tree is higher, and therefore already this part means putting on chain more transactions, and then also depending on how often this VTXO has been used in an off-chain transaction, this chain becomes long. So we can quickly have 20, 30, 40, 50 transactions that we need to push on chain in case of a unilateral exit, which would be like deadly in a higher fee environment already, especially depending on how high are your funds. Now it's the same issue as with Lightning, but in Lightning you only have like, I think, 2 transactions. Yeah, where is the dust level for that? And I mean here it's in a different ballpark. Good thing, as said, if a user is like, oh, I'm not trusting that too much anymore, you can participate in on-chain settlement. Doesn't help you though if the server becomes unresponsive. Yeah, because if server is unresponsive, it's unresponsive, and I cannot make a new commitment transaction in a new batch. Yeah, and also, question is if many users do that at the same time, like these transactions all need to be confirmed before batch expiry. And every single transaction, there's only one of these transactions that can go into one block. Yeah, so they can get a long process. Okay, last slide, some research topics. As mentioned here, we might have these very long transaction chains that create high exit cost. Is there any possibility to reduce that? And then also, what happens in a mass exit scenario? We have all these transactions that hit on chain. What if we have a congested on-chain environment anyway? All these transactions need to be confirmed before batch expiry, because if the batch expires, funds go to the operator. Yeah. With Arcade, we actually want to add something like Arcade script. It's an enhanced version of Bitcoin script, where we want to like build off-chain contracts, etc., etc. Question is, what will we do with such contracts if that hits on chain? Because if we use additional opcodes or an off-chain environment, what happens if we want to put that on chain? Yeah, I mentioned that before. Operator security upgrade. Can we have a federated operator? That would happen probably via nested Mosaic. Can we split roles and, for example, put a signer in a trusted execution environment? And yeah, split roles in general, have the liquidity provider be a separate entity, etc., etc. Yeah, and a big question mark is, what does the fee structure look like? Yeah, off-chain fees, on-chain fees, yeah, especially also if we consolidate off-chain BTXOs with different like expiration times, that creates like questions. Who should pay them if the recipients needs to renew these BTXOs quickly? Yeah, and what, how can ARC fit into the LM infrastructure? Yeah, thank you. And here is Arcade is actually on mainnet since October. Here's a link to the wallet if you want to try it out. Yeah, it's still a bit reckless, but it works, yeah, smoothly. So yeah, give it a try.
Alright, ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for her once again. Thank you so much. We are gonna continue with what's happening. My God, I'm back. Take my